Why is it that Rolls-Royce cars are expensive? Firstly, dismal economies of scale. When you are selling few cars, you need to charge a lot more per car to repay the costs of development. Secondly, they are still using a lot of 18th century manufacturing techniques. Less than before World War II, but still a lot. Back in the 1790s, Joseph Bramah and Henry Maudslay were pioneering precision repetition engineering that allowed high-quality parts to be installed without hand fitting. The way it was done formerly, and was still done by Rolls-Royce on every part of their cars until World War II, was to make the parts roughly right, then hand-fit each to work perfectly in just that one location. When you needed to replace it, you had to spend hours hand-fitting the replacement part. It was that hand-fitting that was what required the Rolls-Royce technician to fly to wherever you were in the world, because the part wouldn't fit straight in. Rolls-Royce had to catch up fast in World War II when they couldn't produce enough Merlin engines and had to get others to produce them. They were shocked when Ford of Dagenham explained that the Rolls-Royce manufacturing tolerances were nothing like precise enough for the Ford assembly line. Ford didn't hand-fit, they got it right first time, or the part was rejected. For a premium product, such as the Merlin, the specifications were tighter, but they still did not need hand-fitting. What that meant in real terms was that Ford produced thousands of Merlins without a reject. Because the parts were interchangeable, the overhaul time of a Merlin, a critical factor in wartime use, dropped by a huge amount. An old aircraft fitter I met claimed that they were overhauling late-model Merlins in as many minutes as the early ones took hours, but he may have been stretching it a little. Later, Packard was engaged to produce Merlins in the USA, and the legend is that it was Packard, a prestige manufacturer, who taught RR about interchangeability because it was just too embarrassing to admit that it was Ford. Key point is that the Ford-built Merlins were at least as reliable as the RR factory ones. Hand building does not make better motors than those manufactured to stringent tolerances in the first place. Another problem with RR design is one that afflicted much of British industry through the 20th century. The multiple levels of class distinction in the UK meant that the design office didn't speak to the factory floor or to the mechanics who had to service the vehicles. That made for designs that were unnecessarily difficult to build and sometimes extraordinarily difficult to service or repair. In 1903, Henry Leland in the USA applied to motor cars the ideas developed by Bramah and Maudslay, and their apprentices including Joseph Whitworth and James Naismith a century earlier, and by firearms manufacturers including Colt and Springfield. His cars were designed to be built to the highest standards simply, and to be serviced and repaired easily. Shortly after his Cadillac company was bought by General Motors, Leland left the company to form Lincoln, which was subsequently bought by Ford. Neither company could sell the kind of mystique of Rolls-Royce because too few U.S. magnates took as much delight as the Norman British still do in the thought of so many common people slaving over the details of their cars. Rolls are expensive thanks to their targeted market, which they still pursue. Rolls-Royce and Cadillac were introduced in 1906. Both targeted the same small market, so had low sales during their first year. Cadillac felt they could sell more with a lower price but needed the orders to do that. Western Europe was full of small luxury car manufacturers whose vehicles had constant problems, so Cadillac took 5 of their '06 models to a car show in France where they allowed others to drive them around a track for a while before completely dismantling all 5, including their engines and transmissions, and mixing up all the parts before putting them back together. All the components fitted perfectly and 4 cars started on the first crank with the 5th car on the second try. That feat impressed the wealthy Europeans enough for 12,000 of them to order one during and after the show. Cadillac cranked out 10,000 of those within a year along with those for the US market. A few years later, Cadillac was the largest auto manufacturer in the world. Because they made a high-quality automobile that was sold for a reasonable price. Cadillacs remained popular because they had a higher resale value since they were easy to sell thanks to an ample supply of replacement parts that their dealers kept in stock. A Rolls-Royce was harder to sell used since one had to order parts from the factory in England then wait for those to be made if they were out. I got to check out part of a car collection that amassed by a man that owned the only decent auto repair shop in East Texas from the 1930s through the 60s. He had several old RRs that were towed in for repairs, then after several years was told to keep them after their prepaid part orders failed to show up. 20 years later I was working on a big estate house that had a 70s Rolls parked in one of the 6 garage bays. The elderly lady owner said her late husband bought it new thinking it would appreciate in value as he used it for business purposes. The car wound up having one problem after another, so he tried to sell it and found no buyers unless it was for cheap. So they kept it and had their dayman take it a few times each month to pick up clients at the local airport until it broke down again. She told me that I could buy it and to make her an offer. I didn't have any spare cash in the bank for something like that, so passed on it. Discovered later that she sold it to another customer's 18-year-old son for $3,000, who got dad to pay for $1,500 in repairs before trying to resell it in Hemmings and other Auto Trader rags for a high price that gradually dropped over the next 4 years. The old man got tired of it taking up space in the garage, so sold it for $3,000 to a local car collector he knew for display in his local antique and classic car museum.